Born unto Mayhem. Written by Timothy J.R. Raines. Narrated by Sarah Palmero.
Chapter 1. Offitfjord, Hålogaland, 400 A.D. Hervor. The thralls have already sheared half the sheep in my grandfather's flock, and I'm supposed to be spinning the wool into yarn for my mother. I should be proud to come from such a wealthy family, with so much wool to spin. It's noble work, my mother says, the honor of women everywhere. Even the goddess Frigg spins yarn in Asgard. I hate spinning yarn. I can deal with a fleece or two, but my father said that last night the thralls dropped off 2 whole sacks. 2 whole sacks! I'll be spinning yarn for days. Loki. 1 hour of rolling wool onto a spindle, and I'm ready to throw myself into the fjord. Of course, my parents would just send my spinning tools along with me in the funeral boat, so I could keep spinning in Valhalla. Gods. I don't see why the thralls can't do it. They're used to endless, mind-numbing work. I'd rather pick rocks out of a field. I'd rather muck out the latrines. I'd rather slip headfirst into the latrines than spin yarn. My mother comes in from outside. Her eyes harden into points of steel when she sees I'm still sitting on my fur-covered bunk across from the smoking fire pit. Hervor, what are you doing in here? I thought you started spinning over an hour ago. I'm still eating breakfast. She glares down into my half-eaten bowl of porridge. It looks to me like you're finished. It got cold. Well, you shouldn't have taken so long to eat it. Now, go get your spinning tools and get started on the wool. There's really a lot to do today. I can't find my spinning tools. Loki, Hervor. She stoops down at my feet and sweeps her hand under the narrow space beneath my bunk and pats the furs where I'm sitting. Then she searches the bunks where my brothers sleep. I can't resist a smirk as she whips back the furs on young Frodmar's bed and hisses an oath as she snatches up my spinning tools. Looks like young Frodmar would rather be spinning wool than framing the new barn with father, I say. She thrusts the spindle and distaff into my lap. Frigg and Freya, Hervor. You're the oldest child. Why must you always act like you're the youngest? That's enough fooling around for one day. Go down to the stream and get started on the wool. The stream? You mean the wool hasn't even been washed yet? Or combed? Of course it hasn't. Hell and Loki. Hervor, Frodmar's daughter, get going. Fine. Gods. When I arrive at the stream, my 9-year-old brother Hadric is filling up 2 wooden buckets to water our horses. There's still patches of snow along the bank where it's shaded by the trees, and as Hadric stumbles up from the water, I can hear the ice sloshing against the sides of the buckets. The last thing I want to do is get down on my knees on that muddy bank and dip my hands into that freezing stream. I don't see why those thralls couldn't have washed the wool. Lazy ingrates. Ugh. I'd rather die than spin this wool into yarn. I stretch my back and groan miserably as I watch my brother. Are you going up to the stable, Hadric? Yes. I think I'll come with you. Can you carry a bucket? No. Please, Hervor. They're heavy. No. It's your job to water the horses. And how will you become a man if you can't even carry 2 buckets of water by yourself? Fine, he says. Then he looks back over his shoulder. But what about the wool? Don't you have to start spinning it into yarn? I glance at the 2 bulging sacks on the muddy bank and make up my mind. Hell can spin this wool into yarn. Hadric gasps as I fling my spindle and distaff into the stream. Hervor, father's going to beat you. It's worth it not doing my chores. He shakes his head. He's worried. He's still afraid of father, and I know he hates when mother makes him stand outside with Rugga and young Frodmar to watch while father beats me. I try to show my brothers how to be strong by keeping a straight face and never crying out when father hits me. But sometimes, if he beats me bloody, I can hear Hadric sobbing. That always feels worse than any beating father can dish out. I guess I can carry one of his buckets for him. I follow Hadric up to the stable, and while he's feeding and watering all the other horses, I go into Trundi's stall and start brushing down his glossy coat. Trundi was a Yule gift from my grandfather for turning 16 years old. Everyone knows the best horses come from Borg, and grandfather says that as the Princess of Lofoten, it would be beneath me to ride a lesser breed. Of course, I've hardly ridden him at all yet, since it's only just begun to get light during the day again. It's not good for such a fine horse to stay penned up inside a stall. "What are you doing?" Hadric asks as I throw the wool blanket over Trundi's back and start fitting him with the bridle. "Taking Trundi out for a ride. Tell Mother you haven't seen me." "What? I'm not going to lie to Mother." "You'd better." I lead Trundi from the stall and climb up on his back. "Hervor!" But before he can argue, I crack the reins. Trundi rears up with a wild whinny, and we thunder off from the stable. Spring has turned everything yellow and brown. The fields are soggy and full of mud, and the leaves haven't come out yet on the trees. The air is heavy and damp from the melting snow, and my lungs are burning as we gallop through the woods up to my grandfather's sheep pasture. The split-rail fence that goes around my grandfather's sheep pasture is the best place in Alfheimfjord for jumping. I'm not allowed to jump that fence. My father worries I'll knock down the rails and let the sheep out, and he says he doesn't want me causing trouble for the thralls. But I'm already in for a beating, so I might as well jump it. Some thralls are at work in the sheep pasture, shearing the other half of the flock, while others gather the wool and stuff it into huge brown sacks. It annoys me to see them doing this, because I know that tomorrow I'm going to find 2 of those sacks down by the stream with the others, waiting to be washed and combed and spun into yarn. I'm starting to dread going home to my father. He'll be pretty mad when he hears I threw my spinning tools in the stream. I can already see his face turning red, his beard bristling. That was a stupid thing to do. I'll be sore tomorrow, that's for sure. That's what I get for showing off in front of Hadric. The water will be freezing, but maybe I can go back and find my spindle. Then I could say I did some spinning, even if I don't get through very much. There. I'll jump the fence a couple times, and go back and try to fish my spinning tools out of the stream. I could always say I dropped them in the water while I was washing the wool. I wish those thralls weren't there to watch me, though. I haven't done any jumping yet with Trundi. They'll be laughing if I mess it up. Filthy, ungrateful shepherds. My grandfather treats them far better than they deserve. I'll show them. I'll show them how to jump this fence. I crack the reins and Trundi lurches into motion. We're galloping hard toward the fence, churning up clods of mud as we thunder across the wet field. I lean in low to prepare for the jump as he speeds up for the approach. I breathe out as we vault the fence. My heart stops. We're airborne for a single exhilarating count. Then we land again in hammering cadence, easing off into a mild canter. "There's a good boy," I say, stroking his mane. But as we circle around for the second jump, I get a warning bark from the shepherd dog. Some of the sheep on the other side of the pasture are distressed by our commotion, and have scattered from the rest of the flock. The thralls are staring at me. Impudent shepherds. If they were my thralls, I'd scoop their eyes out for looking at me like that. As if I'm going to stop jumping the fence and go away on their account. Dirty ingrates. My grandfather shouldn't be soft on them. The pasture slopes gently down toward the woods where it's fenced off again at the tree line. It's not very steep, but as I set Trundi into a gallop, I forget to take into account that from this side, I'll be jumping the fence uphill. We fly toward the fence, but this time as we make the jump, I feel something jerk beneath me. I look back and see I've knocked the 2 top rails off the fence. One of the thralls is coming down, a wiry man with short-cropped hair and an iron collar around his neck. "Ho there, Hervor," he calls and waves me over. Here we go. I ride up to him, and Trundi stamps and snorts as we circle around him like some captured runaway. What do you want, thrall? This thrall isn't afraid of Trundi like most thralls are, and he even has the nerve to take hold of the bridle to steady him. And then, as if that isn't brazen enough, he looks me right in the eye and points to the 2 rails lying in the muddy grass. These thralls, I tell you.
Hasn't your father told you not to jump the Jarl's fence?
He says. It's none of your business what my father says to me, and if you like having 2 hands, you better let go of my horse.
Pretty sure that's what he said,
he says, without unhanding Trundi's bridle.
But I tell you what, Hervor, if you put those rails back up on the fence and go away, I won't say a word about it. And if your father comes looking and asks if we've seen you, I'll even tell him you came by and helped us with the sheep for a bit, until you got bored and went elsewhere. How does that sound to you?
Unbelievable. The balls on this shepherd. I jumped down off Trundi's back, about ready to cave his head in for his insolence. It sounds to me like you can't tell the difference between the Jarl's granddaughter and some scabby thrall maiden. You think I'll allow myself to be coerced by some turd-mongering thrall into doing something other than what I feel like? Go lie in your bed of dirt. I spit in his face and kick down the remaining rails, knocking out a whole section of the fence. Now, the other thralls are coming down.
Folky, what's going on?
What do you think? Folky says, wiping the string of saliva out of his patchy beard and flicking it into the grass.
Same thing as always.
Then he glares at me like he's about to lose his temper. If this Folky fellow was a free man, I'd already be pounding his face in for looking at me that way. But there's a pretty steep fine for assaulting another man's thrall, and I've already let Hadric spend my allowance for this month, so I can't afford to hit him first. You better fix that fence and get back to those sheep, I tell him, or I'll let Asger know I saw you sitting down, and you'll all be whipped for slacking off. The thralls running over hesitate and look between themselves, but this thrall, Folky, keeps looking me in the eye.
And just what is it you're slacking off from, Hervor?
He says.
All the other girls your age are spinning yarn for their mothers at home. How come you have time to come out to the Jarl's pasture and play? I think it's you who needs a whipping.
You better be prepared to fight if you're going to speak to me that way. He snorts.
I'm not about to throw away my life.
Fine. Maybe I'll go right now and tell my grandfather you said I need a whipping, and demand he have you fed to the hounds.
At which point the Jarl will ask you what you were doing in his sheep pasture, instead of spinning yarn out of the wool he made us take down to your mother. Just let us be, Hervor. We're only trying to do our work, and no one wants to fight you.
This thrall is getting on my nerves, scolding me and looking me in the eye. He's a foot taller than I am, but I give him a hard shove. He says an oath behind his beard and staggers back, nearly losing his footing. If he shoves me back, I'll tear his head right off his shoulders. Gods in Asgard, I hope he shoves me back.
Just walk away, Folky,
cries one of the other shepherds as they come running over.
Don't let her get to you.
The way Folky is glaring at me, I know he's aching to break my nose. There's a twitch in his lip. He clenches and unclenches his fists. He's about to give in to his anger. I'm ready for it. I'll slip his punch and knock his teeth out. To my dismay, he starts heading back toward the sheep. Fy fan, where do you think you're going? Get back here and fight, you knitting. Din jævla agasoper.
Hervor,
shouts one of the other thralls.
You know dueling words are forbidden.
Thrusting boy.
Hervor.
Fine. Go on then. Get back to your pig pen. Go suckle your fathers, you man-biting shepherds. Finally, Folky whirls around.
You spoiled brat. It's time you knew. Your real father was a slave like us. Your mother had you with a swineherd.
The other shepherds gape and turn white, but I'm seeing red. Fine or no fine, no thrall is going to get away with that. I head straight for him without a word and punch him in the mouth, so hard it knocks him off his feet. He glares up at me with a bloody lip, but before he can get up, I seize him by the hair. He snarls and grabs my wrist with both hands. I hit him again, and his nose cracks under my knuckles.
That's enough, Hervor. Let him be.
The other thralls snatch me from behind, and Folky yells as they pull me off him. I'm clutching a brown patch of hair between my fingers. How dare you? My father's only ever looked out for you. He treats you far better than you deserve. How dare you speak of him that way? Folky spits out a bloody tooth and winces as he sets his nose. But he's chuckling as he gets back on his feet.
That's just it, Hervor.
He laughs, blood trickling over his lips.
Frodmar's not your father. Don't, Folky.
One of the shepherds warns him. But Folky doesn't listen. He's already crossed the line, and now he's giving in wholeheartedly.
Frodmar's your stepfather,
he says, grinning with his bloody teeth.
When your mother was a little younger than you, she couldn't hold her mead. And once, when the Jarl threw a feast for some of his bravest men, she got very drunk and wandered off. She stumbled into a swineherd's hut while he was sleeping. Thor and Loki, shut your mouth! And what do you think they did in there?
Says Folky, savoring every word.
Did you hear me, girl? You thought you came from a great line of Huskarls and Jarl's daughters? The Princess of Lofoten? What a joke! You're a swineherd's bastard girl. Gods in Asgard, Folky.
I'll kill you, I say, shivering. I swear on the jaws of Fenrir, you're a dead man. But Folky is still basking in his revenge.
Frodmar married your mother as a favor to the Jarl so no one would know where you came from. But we all know, Hervor. We all know. You're the only one who doesn't, because the Jarl forbids all Hålogaland from speaking of it. On pain of death,
says one of the others.
Which you seem to have forgotten, Folky. What do you think's going to happen to you now?
At last, Folky realizes what he's done, and he backs away, turning pale. He wrings his hands.
You're right,
he says with a cracking voice.
I really lost it there. Odin, help me. What am I going to do? Make a run for it,
the other shepherd says quietly.
At least then you'll have a chance to get away. If you stay here, you'll be without a head by sundown.
He nods and glances quickly around the pasture to make sure no one's watching. Then he sends me one last hateful look and darts off into the trees. My heart is racing as I watch him go. My fingers are tingling. It's true, isn't it? I'm unable to hide the panic in my voice as the two thralls release me and back away.
No, Hervor, of course not. Folky didn't know what he was saying.
Yes, he did. And so do you. Hot tears blur my eyes. Gods in Asgard. Oh, gods, I can't breathe. One of the thralls puts his hand on my shoulder.
Take a deep breath. Nice and easy.
No, get away. He backs off and holds up his hands.
Perhaps it's best if you speak to your mother.
Chapter 2. Hervor. I fly up the wooded path to the house. There's blue smoke coming from the chimney, and two of our thrall women are sitting out on the grass plucking chickens. I'm on them before they can get to their feet. Where is she? Where's my mother? They cringe away like I'm about to hit them, and I jump down from Trundy and thrust the reins into the hands of the nearest girl. Mother! My mother comes out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Loki's children. What are you... Is it true? Is what? That Frodmar is not my father, and that you got drunk and went into a swineherd's hut. Obviously it isn't true. Who told you that? One of grandfather's thralls. I was jumping the fence and knocked down some of the rails, and when he asked me to leave, I tried to fight him. But then he lost his temper and said a swineherd is my father, not Frodmar. And the other thralls were trying to stop him, saying that grandfather was going to put him to death because he had forbidden all Hålogaland from speaking about it. And then they were all afraid, and he ran for his life into the woods. I burst into tears and sobbed like some stupid little girl. I'm pathetic. All I want is for her to hug me close and tell me it's all a lie. That those thralls somehow knew I'd go up to the sheep pasture today, and conspired together about what they would do and say, and that my grandfather will muster his huskarls and take me with him to hunt them down and get our vengeance. But my mother doesn't hug me. She stands there with her mouth open like she's about to speak, her blue eyes averted up and to the right. "Bola, Almveg," she says, addressing the two thrall women. "Go fetch more wood for the fire, and take your time." "Yes, my lady." She waits for them to leave, listening with her hands on her hips until she's sure they're gone. "You were never meant to know," she says quietly. "No, no, mother." I cover my ears. I don't want to hear it. My world is splitting apart. But my mother continues, her voice stern and calloused. "I was younger than you are, and stupider, and very fond of drinking mead. It's true. I got drunk and slept with a swineherd." I pull my hair, struggling for breath. I can't believe what she's saying. My own mother. "After it happened," she says, "and I knew I was with child, your grandfather did not want us to live in shame, so he forbid anyone to speak of it ever again. The swineherd disappeared, and Fradmar married me before you were born." "It isn't true. Tell me it isn't true." "It is true." My mother folds her arms across her chest. "For 16 years I've kept this from you. I always thought it might feel good to speak of it together. It doesn't. But now you know." I sink to my knees, sobbing wretchedly. "I'm a bastard." "You're no such thing. The day you were born, Fradmar picked you up into his arms and carried you down to the fjord to sprinkle you with water. I claim this girl as my daughter. Her name will be Hervor. That's what he said in front of everyone, and he was smiling proudly." "So what if he adopted me? My blood is swineherd's blood." "Well, Hervor," she says, a bit more softly, "you can choose to see yourself as some swineherd's bastard daughter if you want, but no one else looks at you that way. And as for that thrall who said that, we can go up to the hall right now and tell your grandfather about it, and he'll make sure he's hunted down and brought to justice." She reaches out to stroke my hair, but all I can think of is her stumbling out of her dress in that stinking hovel and letting some gawking swineherd grope her with his filthy hands, the two of them sighing and moaning in the dark. That's how I was born. It's disgusting. I'm disgusting. I pull away from her. "Don't touch me." "Oh, don't be like that." "I don't know how Fradmar lives with you. He must think about it whenever you're together. You gasping underneath another man. A swineherd. A swineherd, Mother. How could you do this to me? Why couldn't you just leave me out in the woods to die?" Her eyes flash with emotion, and she draws back her hand like she's about to slap me. But she doesn't, and the pain in her face hardens into iron. "When you were born," she says, her voice as cold as the winter wind, "that's what everyone told me I should do. Sometimes, Hervor, the things that come out of your mouth, I wonder if I shouldn't have." For a moment, I stare at her in silence. Then I head inside and put my axe and knife into my belt and take down my bow and quiver of arrows down from where they're hung up on the wall over my bunk. "What are you doing?" I don't answer. "Come on, Hervor, where are you going with that?" "I'm going to live out in the woods where I belong, since I'm only a bastard and you never wanted me anyway." "I didn't say that." "You did." She shifts her blue eyes back and forth, then smiles thinly. "Well, are you sure? Lunch will be ready soon." "I'm not hungry." Sniffling, I head past her out the door and fasten my quiver to my hip. She stands in the door frame watching me. "Be home before dark," she says. "I'm not coming home." "Ever?" "No." She opens her mouth like she's about to argue, but she decides to let it go, and I trudge off into the woods. Chapter 3. Hervor. It's getting dark, and the forest is turning cold and blue. There's much more snow in the woods than out in the pasture. The sunlight made it damp and heavy, but now it's starting to crunch under my feet. My sweat's starting to freeze. I should have known it would get this cold. I breathe into my stinging hands and rub them together, wishing I had my mitts and fox fur hat. Pretty stupid just tramping off without them. Now I'm miles from home out in the middle of the woods with no food or water and no hat, mitts, or cloak. And the sun's going down and it's freezing cold. I'm stupid. I'm just a stupid bastard girl who doesn't know anything. I slump down into a snowbank and sob into my hands, wishing I had just gone down to the stream and washed and spun that wool this morning. Then the damp cold starts soaking through my dress. Sniffling, I jump up and brush myself off as best I can and wipe the tears from my cheeks. I might have a swineherd for a father, but that doesn't mean I'm going to freeze tonight. I take a deep breath. I need to pull it together. I feel a bit better after having a cry, and in the bluish light, I start gathering up wood for a fire. The trees are mostly birch that haven't got their leaves yet. Birch bark is good for starting a fire, even when it's wet. Birch bark and old man's beard. Then I find myself a fir tree and start hacking off the green boughs with my axe. Loki, my hands are cold. I pull the wool sleeves of my dress down over my fingers. These fir boughs are good if you need to make a shelter, but in my case, I'm going to spread them on the ground like a mat so I don't have to sit in the snow and get wet and cold. I start weaving them between a couple trees that are close together to make a wall, so when I get the fire going, it'll catch the heat and keep my back warm. Now for the fire. I sniff back my runny nose and snap up a bunch of the small twigs I've gathered into tinder and split some of the larger sticks into kindling. My teeth are chattering and pins are pricking my fingertips, but I rummage through my wood for the fattest branch and start scraping off the bark with the edge of the axe, working it down until I've got a nice flat surface. The cold blows into my dress as I unlace the front and pull out the leather cord with my aching fingers. I try tying the cord to both ends of a stick, but my hands are trembling so bad I can't tighten the knot. I hiss a curse and yank it with my teeth. Now it's like a tiny bow, and I wrap another stick up in the cord and place a green tuft of old man's beard underneath the stick on the flat part of the wood I've scraped down. Then I place the end of my belt between the top of the stick and the palm of my hand and push down nice and tight. Now when I draw the bow back and forth, it twists the stick into the wood and makes a noisy squeak. I do this for a while until it starts to smoke, then I take the stick off the old man's beard to see how it's coming. The wood underneath is all black, but there's no spark yet. I twist the stick with the bow for another minute and check again. It's smoking good now, and this time there's a bright spark in the old man's beard. I drop onto my stomach, tilting my head to the side, and breathe, slow and steady, into the spark until it crackles into a little orange flame. I add some birch bark to it and a bit of tinder, then I stick some kindling over it. It catches within seconds, and soon I've got a nice fire going. I stack up the rest of my wood and sit on the mat of fir boughs in front of the fire and hold my hands out over its toasty heat. I'm feeling pretty proud of myself, and I can't resist a grin. I've built a fire that way countless times, but I feel like I've accomplished something. I've got warmth and light. I could cook some game if I had any. Gods, I wish I had some game roasting on this fire. I think of the supper they're having at home without me. Warm bread, steaming fish fresh from the fjord, dried red dulse, boiled cabbage, and goat's milk and mead to drink. What I wouldn't give for a horn of mead right now. I scoop up a handful of snow and suck on it. It freezes my tongue and the insides of my cheeks until it melts in my mouth. It's a meager drink and only serves to quench my thirst a little. I wonder if they're missing me right now. Hadric will be worried, I know that for sure. but Rugga and young Frodmar could probably care less. Frodmar will glance across the table at my mother, the two of them sharing a secret grin, finally glad to have me gone. No more stupid bastard girl around to remind them of my mother's past. I bet they'll even sleep together to celebrate. They'll all be happier without me. Above the black treetops, the stars twinkle coldly, and blue flames shift and slither across the frigid sky. I lie on my back, like I have so many times, and watch the enchanting glimmer of the northern night. It's what gives this place its name, Hålogaland, land of the high fire. A howl echoes from the mountains. The wolves are out, still hungry from the long dark of winter. I'm not afraid of wolves. They won't come near me, not with the smell of smoke and my fire flickering beside me. I belong here now, out in the cold and lonely wild, with the wolves and the high fire. I'm no longer Hervor Frodmar's daughter. I never was. But I'm not a swineherd's girl either. No, I'm no one. Just Hervor. Hervor the wild girl who lives alone out in the woods. Chapter 4. Hervor. I wake up to cold drops splashing my face and hair. The trees are dripping, and I'm completely soaked. Shivering wet, I stir up the coals and add some wood to get my fire going again. It's still early in the morning, but it's warming up, and the snow's softening and turning slushy in places. Not much sun, though. It's pretty foggy, and as I look up through the bare trees, I can't tell where the mountains stop and the sky begins. I'm starving. My head is aching. My mouth stinks. And when I stand up, I feel faint and want to lie back down. I suck on some snow again. I need to find something to eat. A rabbit, maybe, or a grouse. Or perhaps I'll come across a stream where I can catch a fish or two. A fish would be nice roasting on this fire. Gods, I'm so hungry I could kill a man. I stamp out the fire, knock an arrow in my bow, and tramp through the misty trees. Soon I hear water trickling, but it's only a tiny brook. The water is rushing because of the snow melt, but it's too shallow and rocky, and I'm not catching any fish in there. However, if I follow it downstream, I soon come to a gushing stream that's maybe 50 feet from one bank to another. Pretty sure it's the Sørgstrøm. If that's the case, I've come farther than I thought. There was a troll named Svangur who once lived along the Sørgstrøm, a monster with an insatiable appetite for human flesh. On warm summer nights, he'd creep out of the forest down to the villages by the fjord and sneak around to houses, reaching into open windows and snatching children from their beds. Hunters venturing inland to find game wouldn't come home. He was hungriest in the winter, and when the spring came and the trade started up again along the coast, more than one crew looking to barter goods with the village folk moored their ship along the quay and found whole villages deserted. When my grandfather consulted the shamans, they urged him to make sacrifices to appease the troll, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, he mustered his warriors and led them into the forest to drive Svangur away. Asgers told me stories about how he fought him and slashed his belly across the middle, but that his skin sealed up again before his eyes. He couldn't be killed with weapons of steel, so they set the woods on fire and sent him shrieking up into the mountains. But that was years before I was born. There's been no sight of him ever since. There's movement in the trees across the stream, and I drop low, my bow already drawn back to the corner of my mouth. Loki's children! It's a reindeer, a lone bull coming down to the stream to drink. I can't even believe my luck. It's warm enough. I'd have thought the herds would have migrated out of the forests into the wide-open grounds for calving season. I suppose it's still pretty early, though. He's an old bull. He's already shed his antlers. There's some scarring along his side, too, probably from competing for the females during the rut. I doubt he's got a mate by the looks of him. He's a straggler. The herd's probably moved on without him. He'll be better off keeping me warm and filling my stomach. I whisper a prayer of thanks to Skadi, the hunting goddess, and creep up for a better shot. Luckily, he's about 200 yards upwind, and he hasn't smelled me. The Surgstrom helps put off my scent, and the rushing current masks the sound of my movements. I wish I didn't have to shoot him across the water, though. That'll be a pain. It'll be at least waist high, if it isn't over my head, and freezing. I slip behind a pine tree. Hidden behind the green boughs, I've still got a clear line of sight, but I don't have a shot at his vitals. He's facing me straight on with his head down, drinking from the stream. An arrow to the head probably won't kill him clean. He'll dart off and I'll be tracking him down for days. I'll die of hunger before I find him. No. Once he's had his drink, he'll turn around as he trots away from the stream, and that's when I'll take him down. I draw my bow and steady it against a branch, breathing in short wisps as I wait for my prey to expose his heart. My bow has a 60-pound weight at a 26-inch draw, and I can hold that for about 4 minutes before I start to shake. My father Frodmar made me show him I could hold my bow drawn for that long before he'd take me hunting with him. He also made sure I could toss a sheep's bladder over my head, spin around, and put an arrow through it before it landed, in case a bear ever rushed me. I exhale slowly and think of one of those big reindeer flanks turning on a spit over the fire, the fat all popping and sizzling as it drips into the flame, charred black on the outside, but pink and oozing in the middle. The savory juices flooding my mouth as I tear the meat away from the steaming bone. Gods, I'm starving. I'm hungrier than Fenrir. I need to keep a cool head. I can't be too eager to make the shot, or I'll get excited and miss for sure. Just keep focused and wait for him to turn. His ears twitch and he looks up from the stream over his shoulder. He's heard something. I glance along the trees behind him. Probably just nothing. Bird or a squirrel, maybe. He looks ahead, straight at me, then lowers his head back down to drink. A twig snaps and he whips his head up. He's about to bolt. My heart is racing, but I keep my eye trained on where his vitals are about to be. Movement. Color. A yellow tunic. A man crouching behind a tree, knocking an arrow to his bow. Don't you dare. Don't you dare shoot my reindeer. He's mine. Thwack. My reindeer drops to his side, hooves flying up into the air as he rolls off the bank into the stream. He springs up, but splashes down again, kicks twice, thrashing in the water. Then he's stiff, and a red cloud seeps into the stream. There's a white feathered arrow in his heart. The feathers on my arrows are black. The man in the yellow tunic comes down to the stream and prods my reindeer with the butt of his bow. He grins, muttering to himself, and breathes a cloud of white as he climbs carefully down into the gushing current. He doesn't know I'm here. I'm still holding my bow in full draw. He takes my reindeer by the legs and starts dragging him out of the water, grunting and turning red in the face. That beast is probably twice his weight, but he manages to pull him up on the bank. Then out comes his knife. He's about to gut and skin my reindeer. My reindeer! Thwack! The man in the yellow tunic jerks upright, like someone's dumped cold water over his head, his hands flying up to clutch the black feathered shaft in his throat. It isn't real at first, and there's a moment where I feel nothing, like I've just shot a rabbit or a fox. Then the realization sets in. Black walls rise up out of the snow, trapping me inside the inescapable reality that I have just done a terrible, terrible thing. The bow slips from my shaking hands, and I claw my hair. I want to go back. I want to go back to the second before. The second right before I let my bowstring roll off my fingers. I could have called him out and asked him to share the reindeer with me. I could have challenged him to fight me for it. I could have even shot him in the arm or the leg. But the throat? I've killed him. Oh, gods. He's still standing, barely, hugging a tree to stay on his feet. He sees me now, too. He's staring at me from across the stream, his eyes full of fear and pain and anger. His wheezing breaths come out as long, sucking gasps and high-pitched whistles like a broken flute. His face is whiter than the snow. He makes a gurgling snort, and blood comes streaming out of his nose and gushes from his blue lips. How long can he live like that? My heart stops as he lets go of the tree and takes an unsteady step toward me. He stumbles, dropping to one knee, but he grips the arrow in his rattling hands. He's going to snap it off and pull it out. No, he can't do that. His hands flop to his sides. He doesn't have the nerve. Instead, he leans forward and sweeps out his arm and scoops his knife out of the snow. He wheezes harshly like he's trying to speak, gesturing for me to go over to him. He wants me to finish what I started. I shake my head and shrink further back into the shadows, but he keeps wheezing and waving me over, and I know I can't refuse. Terrified, I emerge from my hiding place and step down into the freezing stream. The current takes my breath away. I wade out into the middle, gasping from the cold. I lose my footing on the slippery stones and nearly roll my ankle. I throw out my arms to steady myself. His face flinches with contempt as he watches me cross the stream, judging me, disappointed in himself for being killed by a stupid bastard girl. My throat is dry as flour. I fumble for the axe in my belt, but I don't think I can do it, not like that. Very slowly, I reach down into the freezing water and pick up a rock in my trembling hand. Shivering, I crawl up onto the bank. I'm standing over him now, and he's staring up at me and wheezing through his throat. I raise my hand above my head. He lowers his eyes, and his lips start moving. He's preparing for the next world. Then his knife hand shoots from his side. I twist away, but he still gets me, and even with the adrenaline surging through my body, I feel the burning gash seeping through my dress above my hip. Hot rage floods my gut, like molten iron spilling into a blacksmith's mold. A wild shriek escapes my throat, and I fling down my arm with all my might. There's a dull crack, and he goes limp. But I go down with him, screaming my lungs out, my arm rising and falling, the forest spinning above and around me in a scarlet blur. I can't stop. Again I swing my club of riverstone. Again and again. Finally, the rock slips from my hand. I stagger back and sit down in the stream with a splash, staring as I reach a trembling hand up to my face and dab the warm, sticky globs sliding down my cheek. My stomach flips and I heave my guts, choking and gagging and spitting in the stream. I stand up from the cold water, weak and light-headed, wondering what I should do. He'll be missed, I'm certain of that. It's who'll be missing him that worries me. He'll be someone's son, brother, husband, someone's father. Oh, hell! I've killed someone's father. There'll be children waiting for him to come back home, but he never will. Oh, gods! Well, at least he wasn't a swineherd, not with that yellow tunic. That wool's a good strong weave, and dyed yarn like that isn't cheap. That's a fine leather belt on him, too. Not that it does much to ease my regret, but I doubt his family will be left lacking. From the looks of him, he might even be one of Grandfather's sworn men. That would be bad. That would be very, very bad. His honor would need to be avenged. This is how feuds are started. I need to tell someone about this. I need to go back right now and tell my grandfather everything that happened, and how sorry I am. Cry in front of him, maybe. Definitely. There will be a great commotion, and the man's family will come down to Offitfjord to demand retribution. My grandfather will either pay them off with a basket of silver, or the determined head of livestock, or, if they can't come to an agreement, he'll send Asgar out to face their champion where 3 roads meet, and everything will be just fine, because no one can beat Asgar Asmundson in combat. But it won't be fine. My grandfather is very fond of me. I know that. But if the man's family finds out he was murdered by a swineherd's bastard daughter, they'll be asking for my head. and no amount of treasure or livestock or duels will give them peace. No, no one can find out about this. No one can know that I'm the one who killed him. I sit down on the bank, rubbing my fingertips into my temples, and try to catch my breath. It'll be okay, I whisper. I can do this. I can figure this out. My stomach growls, reminding me I have another matter to attend to. I need to hurry up and gut that reindeer if I don't want his meat to spoil. I take a moment to breathe, then take out my sax knife. I sink the blade into his rump and start cutting around the anus. Then I slit him open at the pelvis and stand on his legs to prop them apart as I cut through the pelvic bone. I unseam his belly up to the gullet, peel apart the skin and fur to expose his innards, and, carefully checking with my fingers so I don't puncture his guts and bowels, cut through the layer of muscle, grunting as I work the blade through his ribs. Then I reach into his chest cavity to slice away the slimy tissue and free up his guts. Finally, I grasp his windpipe, sever it from his head with 3 forceful strokes, and tug it up from his carcass, dragging with it the gray balloon stomach and shiny green entrails. I dump the reindeer guts into the stream and stare into the flowing water. I still need to skin him and hang him up to drain out the blood, and let the meat dry and cool off. But there's no way I'm lifting him off the ground, and it's not as if I've got a rope with me to hoist him up either. He'll be lighter once I skin him, though. Maybe if I cut him in 2, I can hang him from a branch. Maybe not. Maybe I'll have to quarter him. And Loki. What am I going to do about the man? Then it comes to me, and my stomach sinks. I know what I have to do, but I don't like it. Not at all. I sniff, wiping my nose on my messy sleeve, and start getting him out of his clothes. I slash up his yellow tunic and dip it in the reindeer's blood, then toss it in the stream and watch the current take it. If I'm lucky, it'll make its way down to some village. Gods, I don't think I can do it. I turn away and start to sob. But I have to. I have to do it if I don't want anyone to know. I hold my breath. My heart is pounding. And just as with the reindeer, I kneel down and prop his legs apart.
Chapter 5 Offitfjord, Hålogaland. Jarl Bjarmar shifts his weight in the grand chair of the high table as the 2 feuding farmers depart from his hall, quarreling over a foot of land. The affair could have been resolved that very morning if one hadn't accused the other of moving the boundary stones. He would have welcomed the reprieve from hearing the preliminary pleas and riding out to the pasture and pacing out the field himself before a handful of witnesses. But now that honor had been offended, the 2 would duel in a Hjomgang in a month's time, when all the free men in Hålogaland would gather in Offitfjord for the yearly thing. At least they agreed the matter would be settled at first blood. Too many good men are killed senselessly in duels.
Angli Angelsson,
announces Asgar Asmundsson, as the next plaintiff rises from the waiting bench and approaches the high table.
Jarl Bjarmar,
says Angli.
May Odin the Wise guide your judgments.
Tell me of your matter.
It's my wife.
Frida? Is she all right?
She's fine, if it's her health you mean. I want to divorce her.
Divorce? You just married her. It hasn't even been 6 months. We're still drinking your wedding mead.
I know.
Bjarmar exhales very slowly. On what grounds do you want to divorce her?
I'm a fisherman,
says Angli.
I get up very early in the morning to sail out into the fjord to catch fish for the good people of this village. I'm hauling up bulging nets all day, rowing, weighing anchor, towing heavy lines, and by the time I come back home, I'm completely exhausted. I go to bed early to keep my body strong and fit for work. But Frida prefers to stay up late drinking mead and flirting with the young men.
She is here quite often. Nearly every night, wouldn't you say?
At least,
says Asgar, smirking.
I played a game of Sneffeltaffel with her not too long ago, but she was so drunk it wasn't fun to beat her.
That sounds like my wife to me.
Bjarmar smiles thinly as some of the other huskarls chuckle. Frida's always been a drunk and giddy girl. You knew that when you married her. It's not that she's drunk and giddy, Angli says. It's that each night I go to bed alone to get my rest, only to have Frida come stumbling home at some unspeakable hour, giggling and bumping into things, swearing loudly, and disturbing me from my otherwise peaceful and much-needed sleep. And then, in the morning, when I get up quietly and slip out the door to begin my work, she'll curse and moan about how early I've woken her, and why couldn't I leave more quietly. That woman. At first I said nothing and put up with this irritating habit, but after a while I couldn't stand it and had a word with her. I asked her to be considerate of how hard and long I work, and to go to bed a little earlier. He scowls, clenching his fists, his voice lowering in a snarl. And do you know what she said to me? She called me a poor nursing infant, said my mother weaned me too early, and that I still need her milk to fall asleep. You know my mother's been dead for 7 years. And then, as if that isn't enough, she says if I knew anything about pleasing girls, I'd behave more like my brother Nori, and that he's better for a woman than I am. All the smiles have faded, and Bjarmar tenses his shoulders. This is serious, he says. But tell me, Angli, when Frida said this, did you strike her and restore your honor? No. If I struck that woman, she'd be the one in here divorcing me. And I'd rather not be known to everyone as the kind of man who knocks his wife around. Bjarmar tilts his head against the back of his chair. It would have been simpler if Angli had hit Frida, and she was the one before him now. It would have been better for Angli that way, too. There would be fair grounds for a divorce, and no penalty for him striking her because of what she'd said to him. He would have needed only to give his permission for them to separate, and Frida could have gathered her belongings and gone back to live with her parents. That would have been the end of the matter. However, a man sending his wife back to her father is a more complex affair. You're sure you and Frida can't be reconciled? Angli scoffs. No, I won't live with a woman who speaks to me like that. What was the bride price you paid her father? 12 ounces of silver. And Frida's mourning gift? 1/3 of that. Bjarmar holds his breath for a moment and anxiously taps his fingers on the arm of his chair. Angli Angelsson, I permit you to divorce your wife. Frida will return to her father's house along with her dowry and all her belongings. Angli sighs with relief. And an additional 1 pound of silver, or the equivalent in livestock or resources. What? Another pound of silver? But it took me 3 years to save up that amount. How is that a fair judgment? Bjarmar leans forward in his chair, suddenly angry. How do you think everyone will look at Frida when you send her back to her parents after only 5 months of marriage? She humiliated you in private, but you will be humiliating her publicly. Not only her, but her whole family, since by doing this, you are saying her mother and father raised her poorly, and did not teach her how to respect a man. That pound of silver is to restore their honor. Unless you'd rather take one of Frida's brothers to the Hjolm. No, says Angli sadly, but how am I to come up with such a sum? Patience and hard work. If this is truly what you want, I'm sure you'll find a way. Perhaps Chief Torvald, suggests Aska. Yes. The chieftain of Borg is planning a raiding voyage with some of the other chiefs of Lofoten. They'll be leaving in the next few weeks before the thing, but I'm sure you could join up with them, since you make your living on the sea. You'll be gone for months at the very least, but you'll come back a rich man. If you come back. And who knows? Some time apart from Frida may soften your heart. Angli strokes his beard. I've never gone on a raid before, but now that you suggest it, I think it could be good for both of us. You have my blessing if you want to go. Come back rich, and boasting of your courageous deeds. Thank you, Jarl Bjarmar. As Angli Angelsson turns to leave,
Svafa and Frodmar get up from the waiting bench and approach the high table. The sight of his daughter and her husband lightens his mood, and he relaxes a little bit. After them, there is only one more plaintive, a distraught young man fidgeting anxiously with a strip of yellow cloth. "May Odin the Wise guide your judgments," Svafa and Frodmar say together. Bjarmar sighs gladly.
Good to see the two of you. Tell me, Frodmar, how's the barn coming? I haven't been up to see it yet, but I mean to when I'm not busy.
It's going well. I've let the boys do most of it, right from the planning stage to laying out the foundation, measuring, cutting, directing the thralls. They make me proud.
The gods have blessed you, Frodmar. And Svafa, what about the wool I sent you? Have you and Hervor started working it on the loom? No, too soon, I suppose. The way she spins yarn, you'll be lucky to dye it before the end of summer.
There's a twitch in Svafa's face, and she's about to speak, but her father cuts her off.
Which reminds me,
Bjarmar says,
I've been meaning to speak to the two of you. Now, of course I'd ask Hervor how she feels about this, but I'd like to know what you think first. Mir Naglason will soon be succeeding his father as the chief of Mellingsfjord. Mir isn't a warrior, but his father is held in high esteem, and in recent years has become quite wealthy through trade. I thought that since he'll be looking for a wife, and that, well, since Mellingsfjord isn't too far north of here...
Svafa shifts uncomfortably as she and her husband exchange an awkward glance. It's actually because of Hervor that we're here.
Of course it is,
Bjarmar grumbles as he slumps against the back of his chair, reconsidering whether Mir Naglason would be a suitable match for his hot-headed granddaughter.
She's been fighting again.
Despite his stern look of disapproval, a small smile forms on Asgar's lips that could almost be interpreted as a sense of pride in Hålogaland's princess. No. Well, yes. But she's run off.
Well,
he chuckles.
I can't have Asgard track her down every time she takes off into the woods. She'll come home again when she's ready. She always does.
I know. But this time... Frodmar interrupts her.
She's been gone 5 days, Lord.
5?
Bjarmar bolts upright.
5 days? My granddaughter has been missing in the woods for 5 days, and you only think to tell me now?
We had a fight, says Svafa. I said some things I shouldn't have. I thought it would be best to let her have some time to cool off and think. Frodmar shakes his head, his eyes filling.
Some thrall told my little girl that her real father is a swineherd, that she's a bastard.
That's an outrageous lie.
Asgar looks at the man next to him.
That runaway thrall that you recaptured the other day.
The Huskarl nods.
Folki.
It's worse than that, says Svafa as she wrings her hands. She was convinced by what they said, and confronted me in a panic. I had no choice. I told her it was true. Bjarmar turns white.
Gods in Asgard. No wonder.
He sits back down in disbelief.
5 days and nights she's been out there believing she's some thrall's bastard daughter. She must be beside herself with grief. Who knows what kind of things she's gotten into her head? Svafa, if she's hurt herself...
Frodmar puts his arm around her as Svafa hangs her head miserably. I didn't want to disobey you by telling her the real story, she says.
Oh, to hell with all that. At this point, I'd rather that you told her. Loki, Svafa.
Which way did she go?
Asks Asgar.
I'll go after her right now.
Northeast, she says, toward the valley. Asgar's face darkens with concern, and all eyes turn to the back of the hall as the young man stands up from the waiting bench.
Forgive me, he says, but I am from northeast of here. From Garvik.
Your name?
Says Asgar.
Bjarni Karlsson?
Speak, Bjarni Karlsson.
4 days ago, my brother Gary went hunting. That night, when he didn't return, we all thought he'd spent the night in the forest. But in the morning, my wife found this washed up on the bank of the Sörgström.
The hall goes very quiet, and Bjarmar turns as pale as bone as Bjarni Karlsson holds up the shredded remains of a blood-stained yellow tunic.
At first we thought a bear got him, or wolves, but what sort of beast takes a man out of his clothes?
Says Frodmar. Svafa looks anxiously between her father and husband. You don't really think it could be? Asger takes the tunic from the young man, and an old hatred ignites in his eyes as he looks it over. Svanger, he snarls. Svafa covers her mouth. Bjarmar's hands tremble on the arms of his chair. Ready the horses. Fetch the hounds. Send word to the neighboring villages. I want every male between the age of 12 and 60 armed and dressed for battle. Frodmar, my mail and my helm. As the huskarls leap to action with grim urgency, Asgar Asmundson storms out of the hall onto the wooden steps overlooking the fjord-side village, and lifting the ram's horn from where it slung across his chest, his cheeks swell with a deep, resounding blast. Chapter 6. Fog enshrouds the forest, thick with the smell of melting snow and the sound of dripping water. Everything is wet. Bjarmar pulls his gray fur cloak tighter around his shoulders and directs his mount around a low-hanging branch. On either side of him, a long line of men and hounds pick their way through the bare trees and glistening underbrush in scarlet torchlight. Occasionally, the men holler Hervor's name into the fog with raw voices and less enthusiasm than when they began the search 2 days ago. He never thought he'd be so sick of hearing her name. His own throat is so sore he can only speak in hoarse whispers. He takes a gulp of mead to soothe his gullet, knowing that the drink will dull his wits, but welcoming the brief reprieve from the constant worry festering in his guts. He's hardly slept since Svafa and Frodmar told him Hervor was missing, and barely eaten, though he's forced himself to stomach just enough to keep his strength so he can carry on the search. He tries not to think of how much ground there is to cover. It could take weeks to scour the entire valley, and who knows if there's even anything left to find.
Jarl Bjarmar!
He turns, but he can't see more than a few feet through the swirling mist, though he can hear someone crashing through the brush. They call out again.
Jarl Bjarmar! Over here!
Bellows the man nearest him. His red torch hisses as he waves it back and forth.
The Jarl is here!
A young man, a thrall, stumbles out of the fog and doubles over, gasping.
Jarl Bjarmar, they've... Catch your breath first,
says the man with the torch. Give him a drink of water, Bjarmar says quietly. To speak, it feels like he's swallowed sand. Reluctantly, the man unshoulders his goatskin canteen and offers a mouthful of water to the panting thrall.
Now speak,
he says.
They found...
He huffs.
A body.
His heart stops. But not, he adds, as though carefully instructed not to omit this second detail.
Hervor, Asgar said you'll want to see.
Bjarmar glances at the man with the torch, then back to the thrall, and clears his throat. Show me to him. Some miles away, near the bank of the Sørgstrom, a huskarl unclasps the leash from Folki's iron slave collar and shoves him to the ground. Folki stares up at him in fear, curling up defensively as the huskarl steps over him and stoops down to seize his tattered shirt. Dressed for war, the man is clad in chainmail from head to toe. Only his blue eyes are visible through the slit in his helm. His heart sinks as Frodmar appears behind him, also clad in mail, though no helm hides his dark hair and features. Frodmar is perhaps the last man Folki would like to see.
On your feet, slave!
Folki staggers to find his balance as the huskarl hauls him up off the damp earth. Frodmar is staring at him angrily, and he can see on his face he's getting angrier the more he looks. Go on, snarls the huskarl, giving him another shove. Confused, Folki glances between the two men and the other thralls and warriors of Ulfotfjord grouped around him. You are releasing me? The huskarl laughs cruelly. Yes, we're releasing you. Now run along, and if you see the troll, make sure you scream. Folky swallows nervously. He was very young, but he remembers when a more youthful Jarl Bjarmar drove Svangar from the forest. He remembers, too, the dazed, terror-stricken look of those who'd set eyes on him, and the wailing mothers, sisters, wives, as empty funeral boats were pushed out into the fjord and set ablaze with an arrow from Asgar's bow. Svangar ate his victims living, bones and all. He shrinks back in terror as Frodmar jabs his finger into his chest.
As much as I adore the thought of how you'd squeal as Svangar gorges on your body, if you find my daughter.
He pauses as though what he's about to say requires tremendous patience.
You'll not only have your life, but your freedom.
Folky's eyes go wide and new hope is kindled in his heart. Like every other thrall, he's spent his every spare moment carving trinkets from wood and bone to sell at the docks in hope that he can save enough flecks of silver to buy himself from the Jarl before he grows too old to be useful and is drowned by Asgar in the fjord. But now, he could be a free man this very day. The thought chases away any fear as he tears off into the trees and fog. Troll or not, he will find Hervor Frodmar's daughter, or by all the gods in Asgard, he will die trying. The thrall leads Bjarmar to where Asgar and his men are standing around a large tree on the bank of the river. They're uneasy, whispering among themselves and casting glances into the fog. The whining hounds are kept at a distance, and one of the less seasoned men steps away from the others and vomits into the brush.
"Make way,"
someone says.
"Make way for the Jarl."
The men step aside, and Bjarmar stares up at the headless body hanging by the ankles like a side of beef from a butcher's hook. It's a sight he's not seen since the days of Arngrim and his wicked sons. A man skinned and gutted like an animal. Asgar sends him a grim look.
Gary Carlson, we think.
"Not very easy to tell," says Bjarmar, resisting the panic coiling in his gut. "Take him down. I've seen enough." One of the men starts to climb the tree.
"I've sent someone to tell Bjarni Karlsson his brother has gone on into the next world,"
says Asgar. Then he adds in a low voice, leaning in toward him.
"What do you make of this? Svangar never cared for the taste of wool, but to skin a man and hang him up to age?"
Bjarmar shakes his head.
"No, Asgar. You and I both know this isn't Svangar's work."
"What then? Satyr magic? Berserkergang? A man driven mad from the dark of winter?"
"I'm not sure,"
he says, stabbing his quivering hand on the hilt of his sword.
"I just know I will feel a lot better when we find my granddaughter again."
The man in the tree finally works Gary Carlson loose, and everyone takes a quick step back as the flayed cadaver smacks against the ground. Hervor's plan is working better than she could have hoped. Far better. The woods are alive with shouting men and braying hounds. Their bellowing voices echo all around her in the fog. She'd hoped her grandfather would send out a search party, but she hadn't realized what lengths he'd go to find her. It's too much. She thought she could just come out from hiding and say the troll got her, but that she escaped from his lair. She didn't know this is what she'd be setting in motion. There must be thousands of men combing the forest, all of them armed to the teeth. Her grandfather must have summoned every man from Fagar to Mallingsfjord. She's heard the stories. She should have known how serious Svangar's return would be. Stupid. She's so stupid. What's going to happen when they don't find any sign of him? Some of those men will be expert hunters and trackers. How long before they're able to read the signs of the forest to find out what really happened? And the hounds. She's been careful to bathe herself in the river more than once, but what if they can still smell the blood on her hands? What if she has a guilty scent? It's those thoughts that have kept her running from her grandfather and his men like a hunted fugitive. But she can't keep avoiding them. She's caught between two groups closing in along the bank of the river. She's got no choice but to come out of hiding.
"Hervor!"
hollers a familiar voice.
"Hervor!"
She takes out her knife and slashes up her dress, making sure to catch her skin and draw some blood. Then she rubs leaves and dirt into her hair to make it look like she's escaped.
She has no idea what she's going to say. Her heart is pounding like Sleipnir's 8 galloping hooves. She ducks out from behind the tree and runs toward the sound of his voice. "Here!" she cries into the fog. "I'm here!" "Hervor? Hervor! Oh, thank the gods! Don't stop calling! I'll find you, Hervor! You're safe now!" "Over here!" she cries again. She can see him now, a shadow stumbling through the swirling mist. He sees her, too, and scrambles toward her. Must be some thrall that's found her, the way he's moving. She soon can make out the shape of his head and sees his hair is short. Lucky thrall. He'll be made into a hero. He might even get his freedom. "Frodmar! Frodmar, she's here! I've found her! I've found the princess!" "We're coming," calls Frodmar from farther off. "We'll be right there. Hervor, it's me. It's father." The desperation in his voice breaks her heart. He's been worrying about her. He's been missing her this whole time. He and her grandfather have been searching for her without rest. She's been so stupid. Frodmar loves her. He always has. Even if she was gotten by a swineherd seed, it's Frodmar who's been her father. She sees now what her mother meant. "Father!" Then she's struck by lightning. That thrall, Folki, runs up to her out of the fog, his mouth working frantically. But she can't hear him through the buzzing in her ears. He throws himself at her feet, laughing with joy as though he, of all those searching for her, was the most eager to see her safe. She freezes at the sight of him, turns to ice with a startled look of horror on her face. Then she's doused in boiling water. Bjarmar looks down at the pale faces of his men as a hair-raising shriek rips through the misty trees. "What was that?" he asks, tugging on the reins as his horse whimpers and stamps in a nervous circle. "Sounded almost like a woman," says Asger, tilting up his ear. One of the men shakes his head. "No woman on earth could make such an evil sound." Asger smirks. "You've had a quiet life if you think that." Some of the others chuckle, but it's clear they're trying to mask their fear. Then a tortured squeal, followed by shouts of terror, causes them to whisper prayers and curses as they pull their weapons from their belts. Bjarmar reaches for his own blade, holding back tears of rage as he imagines his granddaughter in the clutches of whatever thing is out there, shrieking in the fog. Another scream rings through the forest, this time accompanied by a shrill horn blast. Asger sounds his horn in return, and Bjarmar and his men move out. His heart is fluttering with the familiar thrill and terror of battle. Asger and the other Huskarls are huffing and jingling as they run on foot alongside his galloping horse, dressed head to toe in heavy mail. Behind them, archers knock arrows to their bowstrings in mid-stride. Thralls with spears and shields hurry along with braying hounds on leashes, others with nets, and some carrying jars of pitch and oil. At last, Bjarmar glimpses the scarlet glow of torches through the shroud of grey. An unearthly wail sends a chill up his spine. Then comes another drawn-out scream. Through the thick swirls of mist, he makes out the shadow of a man sitting down away from the struggle. As he comes nearer, he sees it's Frodmar. His helm and shield are lying on the ground beside him, his sword still in his belt. He's staring at nothing, stuck in a shattered daze like a broken man. Bjarmar calls out his name, but he only stares and shakes his head. Bjarmar swallows dryly and focuses attention on the skirmish ahead. He hears that wild shriek again, and from so close the sound of it grips him with fear. He exchanges a suspicious glance with Asger and directs his trotting mount closer to the fray, where his men are all grouped together in a shield wall. He can't see past them, but over their heads his eye catches the white flash of steel. A Huskarl from Frodmar's group is fighting with a woman. The others have formed a ring around them. The woman is splashed with so much blood she's unrecognizable, drenched in red from head to toe, like the idols of the temple gods at the Yule sacrifice. Her blue eyes are glossed with frenzy. Her clothes are torn. Her hair is full of twigs and leaves, tangled and clotted with mud. A string of drool dangles from her mouth. She's snarling like a sick wolf, exiled from the pack to hunt alone. Wielding an axe in one hand and a sax knife in the other, she pelts the man's shield with stiff blows. He's unable to get around his own guard to swing at her with his axe, and keeps taking steps back. Bjarmar sees what he means to do. This huskarl in his heavy armor means to tire her out until all her energy is spent battering his shield. But it's as if each time her weapon bites into his shield, she's driven into a greater fury, and she keeps up her vicious onslaught, yelping and snarling and pushing him back. Bjarmar can sense by his movements the huskarl is getting frustrated. He's impatient to make his counterattack. The woman strikes horizontally with a powerful swing. The man ducks low, and her axe sweeps over his head. He makes his move, swinging his shield aside to lash out with an upward thrust. But the woman's anticipated this. She's already stepped inside his attack. The knife flashes in her hand, and she sticks the blade into his eyeball. Howling terribly, the man drops to his knees, but his screams cut short as she brings down her axe and splits his helm. She keeps hacking him apart even as he falls, roaring like an angry she-bear, splattering men's shields with globs of gore and flying bits of mail. Then, as she moves her mad blue eyes over the surrounding men, searching out her next victim, he meets her gaze. She stares at him like some starving beast, her eyes full of primitive lust. She doesn't know who he is. She's blood-drunk and out of her mind. But he recognizes her, and it's all he can do not to swoon off his horse. Asger's made the connection too, and as another man steps forward, he claps his hand on his shoulder and squeezes past him into the ring.
"Hervor,"
he says,
"you better settle down, or I'll give you the thrashing of your life."
Someone chuckles,
but Asger doesn't dare look away from her wild gaze. The woman before him now is not Jarl Bjarmar's wayward granddaughter. A dark power seized her. Berserker gang. He's seen this unsettling sickness take men before, and he's not surprised it's taken Hervor, considering the girl's father. He circles around her cautiously, steadying her form. Even in her mindless state, Hervor's stance and footwork are flawless, and it isn't any wonder that she's already slain a few. This irritable, headstrong girl, with too much energy, constantly picking fights and pestering him to spar with her and train her on every type of weapon. From an early age, he's watched her practice with obsessive dedication, always shrugging off her chores to be out in some field swinging her axe, or punching the teeth out of some poor lad for simply being twice her size. On a normal day, Hervor would be a match for all but the best warriors in Hålogaland. Gone berserk? She'll be truly dangerous. He'll have to watch his step, or he'll be drinking mead in Odin's hall. She strikes. Narrowly, he slips aside and her knife hisses by his ear. He circles around her, quickly, but not in any panic, keeping all his weight on his front foot. He holds his shield out at full arm's length, turning it lightly from side to side to mesmerize her with the painted swirls. She strikes again. He pivots and pulls his shield back, causing her to miss completely. She's shivering, chattering her teeth, hissing like a steaming kettle. If he can keep this up, her frenzy will soon wear off, and she'll be in a weakened state. Asger lures her on with his shield, keeping close enough to make it seem like he is in range of her whirring blades. But each time she comes at him, her weapons swipe the air, stoking her into an even hotter rage. His heart is pulsing quickly, and sweat trickles down his nose. His plan is working. Hervor's getting reckless, swinging wildly and missing by even greater distances. He's seeing more openings in her guard, but he still doesn't strike. Not yet. He keeps watching her mad glare, hissing short breaths as he ducks and darts around her. At last, her movements start to slow, and her arms fall to her sides. Her weapons slip to the ground. There's a transformation in her eyes. Where in her place was something wild and evil, she is once again a confused and frightened girl. "Hervor?"
he asks cautiously. "Asger?" She huffs. She looks around in bewilderment at the blood-splattered shields of the men surrounding her. She stares down at her crimson hands. Oh no. She starts to panic. I'm sorry, grandfather!" But the Jarl shakes his head.
"Asger."
Hervor backs away as he steps toward her.
Wait!
His hand moves in a blur, and there's a burst of light as she plunges into the freezing fjord. Chapter 7. Hervor. When I open my eyes again, the forest is moving above me through the fog. My arms are stretched over my head, and my wrists and ankles are lashed to a wooden frame. Some horse is pulling me along. I don't know why they're dragging me like this through the forest. It must be to punish me. It's working. I'm so weak and tired, I feel like every bump and knock is going to crack my bones. Behind me, my grandfather's huskarls are walking 2 by 2, only their eyes visible behind their helms and veils of chain. Asger's trudging along at my side, his shoulders slouching under the weight of his heavy mail coat, and the shield slung across his back. I've never seen Asger weary in my life. I never thought it was possible. He looks spent, like he's been through an ordeal. I want to ask him about what happened, but he doesn't look like he's in the mood for talking, and when I try to speak, my lips are too exhausted to make the words. There's a lot I can't remember, but I know I've killed my grandfather's men. By now, they've figured out what happened to the man in the yellow tunic. It isn't looking good for me. I'll be executed for sure. My grandfather doesn't have any choice after what I've done. It would be unfair of him to let me live. If he did, it would show everyone in Hålogaland that he's too old and soft-hearted to uphold the laws of our people. He wouldn't stay Jarl for very long. No, all that's left for me is to show Odin my courage and die fearlessly. I wonder how they'll do it. Beheading wouldn't be so bad. It's usually thralls who get their heads chopped off for disobeying their masters, but it looks quick and mostly painless. Or drowning. But only thralls who have gotten too old to be useful are drowned. Thieves are hung from a tree and left dangling by the neck until they rot and their limbs fall off their bodies. It's a shameful thing, and I've only seen it happen once, but I always thought it would be an all-right way to go, if I had to choose. The more I think about it, though, I'm realizing I won't be getting off so easy. I'll be charged with nid, a term used by my people for any sort of crime that harms society. Lying, stealing, running from duels or battle, killing in secret, defiling graves and bodies, betraying your king, your jarl, or your chieftain, raping women or children, practicing homosexuality or sorcery. Some of these crimes are considered so foul and perverse that my people believe no one would do such things unless influenced by evil spirits. If they execute me as a knitting, then it won't be quick at all. There's a good chance I will be impaled and burned alive, with dry wood to keep the smoke from dulling my wits and suffocating me too early. They'll make good and sure that I die screaming, that they'll know the dark forces have been expelled. Afterward, they'll break up my charred remains and sprinkle the black flakes in the fjord, to be sure that there's nothing left of me that my spirit could come back to repossess. There's a story about a goddess, Gullveig, whose gold lust drove her to commit many evil deeds, and whom the other gods skewered on a spear and burned to death 3 times in Odin's hall. Her magic was so strong that each time she died, she was reborn as an infant. But after the 3rd time they killed her in the fire, her wickedness left her, and she became wise and good, and changed her name to Heidi, though Volva witches and those who practice satyr magic still worship her as Gullveig. For me, the only second rising will be waking up in Niflheim, the coldest, darkest place in the underworld where all knittings are sent. I hope they don't burn me. Someone at the head of the line blows a horn to let the people of Offitfjord know that my grandfather's returning with the hunting party. There's a second horn blast from farther off. We come out of the trees, and after a while we're passing through the gate. In the mist above, I can see the shadows of the cloaked guards peering down at me over the wall. Everyone's gathering to watch the procession. Men still armed to fight the troll come jogging up from the wharf and hurrying out of glowing forges, as women creep hesitantly out of log houses with their children. They're whispering, staring at me in astonishment as I'm paraded past them through the mud. These people have known me my entire life. I'm their princess. They don't know what to think. They're wondering how it is my grandfather rode off into the woods with all these men and boys to save me from the troll, only to drag me home behind a horse like some captured criminal. A wave of silence falls over them the way a river drains before a tidal surge, and for a brief moment, it's like the gods have struck me deaf. Haedric is standing among the crowd, with Ruga and some of their friends. The look he gives me. He spears me through the heart. He shakes his head, his face scrunching into a sob. He disappears in a flash of red as a rock skips off my lip. The taste of blood floods my mouth, and I writhe in my bonds. Who threw that? I'll kill you! Throwing rocks? Ah! Loki! Another rock clips me on the ear, and Asker pulls on his helm and swings his shield down from his shoulder as the people start pelting me with rocks and sticks and clods of mud. Shame on you! Shame!
Hell can have you, Hervor.
Murderer!
Witch.
Pervert! One woman pushes ahead out of the crowd and comes right alongside me. You wretched girl! She screams, her face twisted with grief and hate. Your mother was a fool to bring you into this world. You're worse than your father ever was. Asker snatches her by the arm, and she spits in my eye as he shoves her back into the shouting mob. It's startling how much they hate me all of a sudden. Asker and the Huskarls have had to make a shield wall around me just to keep them from tearing me to pieces. Then their angry voices converge into one, and I can't keep from sobbing as the whole village chants together, Nid, Nid, Nid. We're going up now to the hall, and the Huskarls form a line to keep the crowd at bay. People are still shouting and shaking fists as someone starts loosening my bonds. He tells me to get up, and I try to stand, but I've been lashed to the wooden frame for so long that I collapse right in front of him, and he has to haul me up by the arm. At first, I think he's bringing me up into the hall, but he jerks me over toward the stable, where my grandfather's horses all are kept. The men from the procession are starting to disperse. Some of them are going up in the hall, others are going down to their wives and friends in the crowd. A few are still standing around outside at the bottom of the steps, as if they don't know what to do with themselves. I look for Frogmar and my grandfather among them, but I don't see them. My guard brings me into the stable. My mother's waiting for me there, with Bolla and Almveg. Her eyes are pink and puffy. She's been crying. But when I come in, her face is iron. Mother, I croak.
Strip off her clothes,
she says. The guard turns to leave, but Mother glares at him, as though she expects him to stay. Bolla and Almveg start tearing my dress, ripping it in two right down to my knees. I step out of it, shivering in the drafty air. Almveg gathers up the bloody tatters and discards them. Bolla dips a bucket into the icy trough from where the horses drink. I take a step back. Bolla! My heart stops as she dumps the freezing water over my head. Ah! Hell! Loki! As Bolla dabs me with a towel and scrubs the crusted blood from around my face and neck, my mother steps in close, an inch away from my nose. There's ice in her eyes. Normally I'd meet her gaze with fire, but this time she wins, and I back down.
You were given everything from the day you were born, she says. You could have married anyone you wanted. Not even I had that. And look at how you've squandered it.
Mother?
Don't call me that. I'm not your mother. Not anymore.
She snatches the leather band off my head and marches quickly out of the stable, and I'm left standing there naked with chattering teeth until Almveg comes back with a new dress for me to wear. It's a worn old thing made of coarse, undyed yarn, and I'm ashamed to put it on. Even the two thrall women are dressed more finely. At once, the guard snatches my arm and drags me out of the stable. He hurries me toward the hall, but instead of taking me up the steps, he brings me around back and takes me down into the stone cellar where all the stores are kept. It's a dark place, the cellar under the hall. Asger and another man are holding up torches while some thralls move sacks and big clay jars out of one of the back rooms. I used to play down here, so I know what's in that room, and what it's used for. Asker, where's my grandfather? But Asker only snorts and shakes his head.
Bring her in.
No, I want to talk to my grandfather. Asker! I brace myself against the floor and reach out for the door frame as the men drag me into the cell. But they overpower me, and a chill shoots up my spine as my fingernails rake the rough wood. In the red light, I see an old bench next to a filthy pot in the corner and an iron shackle chained to the wall. One of the thralls stoops down to clap the iron cuff around my ankle. I hiss and kick him in the face. Then Asger gives me a harsh look and drops down to do it himself. There's something final about the lock clicking on the shackle. I start to sob as he gets up to leave, taking the light with him. Asger, wait, please! Asger! Asger! The door slams shut, and a heavy bolt slides into place. I'm engulfed in utter black. Chapter 8. Hervor. It's impossible to say for sure how much time has passed since I've been down here. I'm immersed in total darkness. I don't know if it's day or night. It's throwing off my sleep. I can't tell if my eyes are closed or open. Sometimes I forget if I'm standing up against the wall or lying on the floor. Occasionally, I hear thralls and shuffling on the other side of the door. Probably the thralls fetching some stores up to the hall. It makes me hope that someone might open the door. Sometimes I call out to them. They never answer, not even to tell me to shut my mouth. I think they're feeding me twice a day. That's the only thing I have to look forward to. Those fleeting seconds where someone opens the door and floods my cell with flickering light, and I get a brief glimpse at another living human and can finally see my own hands in front of my face. But then it's over. They abandon me again, and I'm left to fill my belly with cold porridge in the lonely dark. Loki. It's enough to drive a person crazy. Locking them up down here? Nothing to look at but the color black. Nothing to smell but my own shit and piss and the musty cellar. Nothing to think about but how they're going to kill me when they finally get around to it. I wish they'd do it already. It'd be worth it just to see the sun again, and grass, and the sea. Gods, let me out of here. The exact dimensions of this cell are 14 paces by 18 paces, heel to toe. 17 paces by 21 if I pace it out with my hands. There are 267 stones in the wall and on the floor. I've counted them 482 times. There are 24 links in the chain on my ankle, and I can't quite reach the door. I get up on the bench, and standing on my tiptoes, I reach up to the ceiling. To my excitement, I realize I haven't counted the joists yet. I'm moving sideways to the left along the bench, with my arms above my head, reaching from one joist to the next. Suddenly, I lose my footing, and I throw out my hands to grab onto the beam at the top of the wall. I yelp as I catch my fingernail on something sharp. I suck on my finger and feel for whatever it is to make sure I don't make the same mistake again. It's a nail sticking out about half an inch from where the joist is fastened across the top of the beam. I twist my thumb and forefinger around the head, thinking that I ought to count the nails once I'm done with the joists. My wits are dulled from sitting around for so long in the dark, but after a moment, I realize my luck. I spend what feels like an hour wiggling it, tugging it, straining my fingers and rubbing them raw, trying to work it free. It isn't coming loose. I'm closer to prying off my own fingernails than I am to pulling out that nail. Then the wood creaks, and I've got a little more room to grip it. Pain shoots through my fingers, and I can tell I'm bleeding, because they're wet and sticky. My hands are shaking from the effort and the throbbing licks of pain. Then the wood creaks again. I yank so hard on the nail it comes right out of the joist, and I lose my balance and go sailing backwards off the bench. I throw my fists up to my ears to protect my head as I smack against the stone floor with the rattling chain. I lie perfectly still, listening to the quiet clinking in the heavy black. I get up on my hands and knees, sweeping my palms across the floor. I press my shoulder against the bench and reach underneath it, and I nearly laugh out loud as I feel a thin metal object, coarse with rust, underneath my hand. I twist the nail between my fingers, grinning for the first time in I don't know how long. It's bent, but I figure if it was straight, it'd be the length of my middle finger to the center of my palm. It should be thin enough to do the trick. I fit the nail into the small lock on the shackle around my ankle. In the dark, it's easy to visualize the inside of the lock as I jiggle the nail around in the keyhole. There's the pin. I press the tip of the nail against it and push up. Click. The shackle slips off my ankle and clatters to the floor, and for a moment, I sit there in astonishment. Panic flutters in my heart, and I clap the shackle back around my ankle, careful not to lock it again. When they bring my supper, that's when it'll happen. They'll open the door, I'll rush them, take them by surprise. Maybe they'll have a knife in their belt or a sword that I can take. That's going to be tough. If it's Asger or one of the Huskarls, they won't be expecting it. But even so, if they so much as scream or yell, it will alert everyone in Offitfjord. Say I manage to take them down right away without a sound. Maybe they've got a weapon that I can use, and a shirt of mail or some clothes I can change into and disguise myself. I lock them in here, then what? Sneak back out into the forest? Hide until dark, then steal a boat? Where would I go? Somewhere. Someplace far outside Hålogaland. That's what I should have done in the first place. Gods, why am I so stupid? Stupid bastard swineherd girl. There's no way I'm going to pull this off. I have to try, I guess. Better than sitting around in the pitch black, waiting for my execution. The faint footsteps on the cellar stairs are nearly enough to make me vomit. I take deep breaths to calm my nervous shivering. As soon as he comes through that door, I'll slam into him and poke this nail through his throat. Odin, guide my hands in battle, I whisper, but even as the prayer escapes my lips, it seems unlikely I'll be getting help from any god. A lump swells in the back of my throat as a dark thought occurs to me. There are some who might be willing. A cold finger traces up my spine. Golveg, help me to escape tonight. Accept the blood I am about to spill as an oblation. The hair rises on the back of my neck as I hear my grandfather's muffled voice on the other side of the door, and I quickly tuck the nail away underneath the bench. The heavy bolt cracks open, and I throw my arm across my face as red light spills into my cell. Wait here, says my grandfather, a shadow behind a flickering torch. He comes inside, followed by another man. It's Asger with my supper. Smoked herring, boiled cabbage, and carrots. He sets the steaming plate down on the bench with a pitcher of mead and steps back, glancing between me and my grandfather.
I'll be right outside,
he says, then leaves and shuts the door. My grandfather gestures to the plate, and I tear into it like a starving dog. I'm so glad to be driving down a hot meal that I don't care that I'm burning my mouth and tongue to cinders. I spit a bone out on the floor and tip up the pitcher and flood my mouth with strong mead. Gods, does it ever feel good to be gulping mead? That's just what I needed to soothe my nerves. I take another swig and set it down. My grandfather is staring at me. He's thinner than usual, hunched over, and his bushy brows are sagging over his eyes. When did his hair become so white? My grandfather never seemed like such an old man before. The sight of him pierces me with a sliver of regret. It's my doing. He sighs deeply, and there's an awkward moment of silence, which he spends wringing his withered hands. Though he's warm and sturdy, my grandfather is an anxious man, tortured day and night by the many worries that burden every ruler. At last he speaks, but there's a frailty in his voice I find unsettling. Hervor, your parents told me what happened in the sheep pasture. Fire licks my insides as I recall that sour incident where that thrall, Folki, wrecked my life with that filthy secret about my mother. My body spasms with a black surge of hate, and I remind myself that I stuck my blade into his belly and let him fumble with his guts for a good minute before shearing his head right off his shoulders. I avenged my honor, I say. I just wish Mother hadn't been so quick to admit what he said. She could have lied. She could have thought of something to keep me from knowing, instead of seizing the opportunity to get it off her chest. Don't be too hard on your mother. my grandfather says.
She's not to blame. She's been the bravest of anyone throughout this whole ordeal.
Why? Because she spread her legs for some swineherd? A great reluctance comes over his face as he weighs the consequences of what he's about to say.
Hervor, he says, there is no swineherd.
What do you mean? Is Frodmar really— He shakes his head. He sits down on the bench beside me, holding the torch in both hands as he leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he stares into the crackling flame.
Angantyr Argrimsson was your father.
A long silence hangs between us before he speaks again. Finally, my grandfather shifts his jaw.
He was a berserker,
He says.
from Bolm Island. He and his brothers used to sail around extorting riches from wealthy men all over Scandinavia. He was a blood-drunk savage. They all were. Everybody hated them. Your uncle Hjorvard challenged Hjalmar the Great-Hearted to a Hjolmgang over the Princess of Sweden. 12 on 12. Your father and all his brothers against Hjalmar and 11 of his friends. They all killed each other on Samsa Island. Your father, your uncles, Hjalmar. Only one man lived to sail away from Samsa's shore. A friend of Hjalmar's, a wanderer called Aroad.
A deep rage flares up in my gut. You should have told me. I would have dedicated my life to avenging my father with his blood.
Hervor, the man is part giant. He's lived 10 times as long as you have. He's probably killed more men than you've ever met in your whole life. He beat your uncles to death all by himself. Besides,
He says.
he honored your kin, even though they were a bunch of kniddings, and had the island folk build a great tomb for their bones.
Is this supposed to appease me somehow? You think I should be glad he's dead, the way you're talking?
What do you want me to say? Your father was evil. I never wanted you to know his name. Hell and Loki, the way he treated your mother.
He looks away, as if ashamed.
They were married, he says, briefly. Angantyr and his brothers came here a few weeks before the Hjolmgang, expecting that as their Jarl, I'd send them off with a great feast. I upheld this custom, of course, and after 3 days of drunken reveling, I brought out my chests of treasure, so they might each choose for themselves one trinket from my wealth. Most of them chose a gold ring or a silver buckle for their belts. Your uncle Hjorvard took a fine dagger, with which he said he'd cut out Hjalmar's liver. But your father had no interest in loot that night. He said he wanted your mother for his wife. I was furious, but I knew the kind of trouble it would bring if I refused. I looked over at Asger, and I saw in his eyes that he was thinking the same as me. Swoop down on them quickly and cut them to pieces before the berserk frenzy takes them. But before I could draw my sword, your mother stood up and said she'd marry Angantyr. We had the wedding the next day. But that night, instead of going into the bridal tent we had put up for them, Angantyr led your mother down to the quay and took her on his ship. I knew then the kind of night that she was in for.
He shakes his head.
She's never spoken of it, and I doubt she ever will. It changed her, you know. She never used to have that hardness in her eyes. She's a brave, brave girl, your mother. We'll never know how many lives her actions saved.
What are you talking about? How could such a thing have saved anyone? I'm trembling now, caught up in a hurricane of emotions.
Well, you see, your other grandfather, Arngrim, had given your father his sword for the duel. Tyrfing, it is called. A wicked thing, possessed by dark magic that thirsts for men's blood. No helm, nor shield, nor shirt of mail can guard against it. It can never be dulled or broken. Anyone it cuts will be dead by nightfall, even if it's the smallest scratch. Worst of all, it cannot be unsheathed without taking a life. Every time that blade is drawn, someone will die. If we had set on them while your father had that thing in his possession, they would have butchered us like pigs.
Really? It didn't seem to serve my father very well on Samsa Island.
No, Hervor. Tyrfing has never served anyone. If anything, your father served it, as did his father and your great-grandfather before him. It is the curse of your line, and not a day goes by that I don't thank the gods your father took it with him to the grave.
He chuckles bitterly.
You don't know how I rejoiced when I heard of his death. The fearsome Ongrimsons, all of them struck down in a single day. The gods had answered my prayers. And then I learned your mother was with child. I knew, he says, that if you grew up knowing about your father, you would idolize him. So we kept it secret, all of Hålogaland, and did everything in our power to keep you from taking after him. But his blood is strong in you, and our efforts were in vain.
I know what he means by that, and there's a long silence between us.
I thought,
he says,
that perhaps it would be good for you to know that truth before...
Tell me my fate. He sets his jaw firmly and stands up from the bench.
The crimes you have committed are nid. The people are in an uproar. I have consulted the priests and shamans and the wise men from the neighboring villages to come to a just and fair ruling. The burden you have placed on me is truly great. I am an old man, sick of bloodshed and harsh sentences. You do not know how much I long to forgive your actions and grant you mercy, but there can be none. Hervor, you have been found to be an outlaw. You shall remain imprisoned here until the festival of the midnight sun, at which time you shall be led to the docks, where you shall be chained to 4 ships and ripped to pieces in the fjord. Your death will serve as a sacrifice to the sun god, Sol.
A cold tingle pricks my palms. I dig my fingernails into the bench as I start to shudder uncontrollably.
I'm sorry,
he says, his face softening.
You know I wish that it were not this way.
But I can barely hear him. My chest is tightening, and I can't quite catch my breath. I'm panting like I just ran some far distance. I'm going to be sick. Oh, gods, I'm going to be sick! I turn away and retch my guts all over the floor. But at that moment, as vomit burns the back of my throat, my path is laid out clearly before me. An image flashes in my mind. A vision where I descend into my father's tomb to claim my inheritance. I can see myself reaching out and taking hold of Tyrfing's jeweled hilt. There is no decision to make, only a succession of actions to carry out. I lurch again and sweep my hand underneath the bench. Then I sit up, wipe my mouth, and slouch back against the wall. This is what you've decided? I huff. To have me ripped apart by ships? My grandfather sighs helplessly, and his eyes glisten in the torchlight.
I know it isn't easy for you to see, but I have very little say in matters such as this. My hands are tied.
I don't think that's true at all, I say. My voice is trembling almost as badly as my hands. To think, I always thought you loved me.
You know that I love you. I know you do. It's just that...
His voice trails off, and he turns away toward the wall.
Look,
he says.
No one wants for things to be the way they are. Myself least of all. But the things you've done... I'm sorry, Hervor.
No, I'm sorry. The shackle clatters to the floor as I dart off the bench. He whirls around, dropping the torch to throw up his hands as I come at him with the nail. He cries out and it breaks my heart, but I'm glad he does, because it means I don't have to kill him. The door crashes open, and Asger bursts in with the others, blades drawn. But I've already got my grandfather turned around, with the nail pressed under his throat. Not another step! They stop dead, and Asger cautiously holds out his hand.
Whoa, Hervor. Easy now. That's your old grandfather you've got there.
And you're Jarl, Asger. Now give me your sword, hilt first, with the belt and the scabbard.
Don't be stupid, Hervor,
my grandfather snarls. Shut up! You shut up! I'll kill you, I mean it! I'll kill him, Asger!
All right,
says Asger.
Just let me...
He sheaths his blade and lifts the baldric strap over his head. He flings it to me across the floor with a loud clang. It's right at my feet. I'd like to make a go for it, but the way that Asger's watching me, I don't dare. Give me your word of safe passage. Asger tries to hide a smirk.
Safe passage? Are you serious?
Asger! I push the nail more firmly up under my grandfather's chin. He's making terse, raspy breaths, and his warm blood is trickling down my hand along my wrist. You swore your life to your Jarl. If I kill him because of you, then you're no better than I am. Asger!
Fine, he says. You can have safe passage.
For 3 days.
Loki's children, I give you my word you'll have safe passage for 3 days. Now let him...
I shove my grandfather toward them and dive for Asger's sword. The other Huskarls raise their blades defensively as I whip it from the sheath, but Asger tells them to back down, and they move away from the door to let me through. Warily, I inch past them, shaking and sobbing, keeping them at bay with the sharpened tip of Asger's sword. My grandfather's pressing a bloody hand against his neck. He can't even look at me as I back out into the cellar.
3 days,
says Asger.
After that, we'd better not see you in Hålogaland again.
Just let her go, Asger, my grandfather says quietly. Hating myself, I take one last look at my dear old grandfather. Then, without a word, I tear up the cellar stairs and put Offitfjord behind me.
This has been Born Unto Mayhem, written by Timothy J.R. Raines, narrated by Sarah Palmero.